Hey, my name is Jerry Paffendorf. We're in Detroit, Michigan. I guess I'm a Silicon Valley refugee of sorts. My friends and I like to build for the internet, and about 3.5 years ago I moved to Detroit, Michigan to experiment with putting a great American Rust Belt city on the internet in new ways. And along the way probably fell in love with the whole place more than I thought.
The name of your project?
Loveland Technologies is our company.
And so how do you apply those concepts that you just mentioned to land use through that?
Well, we have an interesting adventure, because when we started 3 years ago, our first project was called Micro Real Estate, and you could purchase little square inches of real and virtual land in the city. So it was $1 per square inch, and we bought vacant lots, and then you could log into the microhood via the intranet online. So the idea was, you put your dollars into the machine, and then you'd log into your property and see who your neighbors were, and you could come up with a story about what you wanted to do with your space, but you could also visit the property. And we actually were one of the first projects on Kickstarter ever, like the first dozen that came out when the site launched. And so that had put us in this kind of like interesting domain between interactive city mapping and crowdfunding and crowdsourcing. And then from there, we kind of,
But were people actually buying the plots?
Sure, yeah, we bought, well, it's a form of social ownership or novelty ownership, do you know what I mean? Loveland owns the deed to the properties.
How much land does Loveland own in Detroit?
We own 2 vacant lots, which is a lot of inches. So the way we did it was our first microhood that we called it. We named it Plymouth, and it was 9 by 9 feet, which is roughly 10,000 square inches. So we issued a first series, like we did it in seasons, sort of. So like season 1 was 10,000 inches, and there were almost 600 people from around the city and the state and the world that inch-vested, and can now log into the little properties and visit and stuff. And from there, we kind of, have been on this, I guess, like an evolutionary adventure of it, because along the way we've leveled up from inches to city scale, but it's kind of the same thing. Like we had a realization along the way that there's really no difference between a square inch and a house, or a microhood in a neighborhood, except for scale. And the internet just kind of laughs at scale, meaning we could take real city data and plug it into our maps, and suddenly we could look at who owns everything in a neighborhood, or what projects are happening, on the west side.
So what's the ultimate vision here? For people to crowdfund the purchase of real estate in Detroit and then develop it?
It kind of depends on how you want to say. I guess the deeper social vision would be for people to have more stable and enjoyable and investable neighborhoods, where you're more conscious of, if you walk by a vacant lot, it should occur to you that you should be able to get in contact with the owner and maybe not even want to buy it, but strike up a request to plant a garden there, or put a sculpture there, or hang out and have an event there. And right now, people are totally unconscious of that. In almost any city, I think. You don't walk down the street in New York and wonder who owns stuff, but there it's because you've got a denser, livelier city where you kind of assume it's out of your price range or whatever else. Detroit's very inspiring because when you have a city that has more than 100,000 properties owned by just the city itself, that it doesn't really want to own, and 90,000 empty buildings, and all the rest of it, finding out who owns what, finding out how to get site control of it, clean it, work on it, buy it, build on it, becomes obvious, not as just a good investment, but as a way to make your neighborhood whole or right again or safe. So there's a whole different level of motivation to it. I got the call a little bit to take some of the innovations and stuff that my friends and I had learned from building virtual worlds and online games and social web stuff, and think about how we can start applying that to maybe more real-world focused problems. SimCity Detroit was kind of a motivating factor, this idea of if we've got this great American city that is so offline right now, and it has so many issues, a lot of which correspond to land use, empty land, empty buildings, etc. And there's really no way for people to get informed about what's what, where, and what you could do to invest in that if you wanted to. What are the opportunities for putting a city online in a way where you can see what's happening to it, you can see data, and you can see opportunities that you can volunteer or donate your money, time, or talents to. We're in a neighborhood called Rush Park right now. So this is it's kind of a long story about how the neighborhood got this way, but this was definitely developed by wealthy Detroiters in the either late 1800s or early 1900s. I forget the exact dates when this all got built out. But
and now it's overgrown.
Here's an example of what we call a Chia house, right? I don't know a better name for that, but that would be, it's what creates an interesting tension in the city sometimes, is that there's a lot of stuff that just straightforwardly needs to be cleaned up and cleaned out. But then sometimes you'll get stuff that passes over into this new form of like nature meets industry meets man-made thing, and it's beautiful. And there's a tension sometimes, and that's the tension that always exists in culture between what's the trade-off for what's the most efficient and what feels the best and nourishes your identity and makes you different.
So you would keep it this way?
For something like this, I personally would. I mean,
Not very usable, is it?
No, it's not usable. It's even hard to say, because you can't always say that, because there's like a whole new generation of amateur developers that I think that are getting trained in Detroit, which is really wonderful, because there's people that, since the barrier to entry is so low, there's a lot of people taking like really big bites of things and then finding out how hard things are, but then coming at hard problems from odd angles, which is how interesting things get developed sometimes. So there's a whole class of people, a whole class of skill sets that do start looking at structures like this and going like, okay, well, let's just cut the loss and say that this is not going to be a regularly habitable residential house again. But what if this was a beautiful sculptural hangout spot where let's open up the back and make it a place where people could sit down in the back and watch movies, you know what I mean? Or have this be something take the husk of the house, keep the beautiful evidence of the life that went on there in that way, but then repurpose the material into something that works in today's terms. So no, I don't think it's a clear win to tear that down. I think, again, it always comes down as well to what neighbors and what the neighborhood thinks.